second largest city in the South. And then last year, well, this year, we're still in 2005, in March of 2005, the National People's Congress, which is a rubber stamp parliament, doing whatever the party tells it to. Almost all of its members are party members, and it follows the party's agenda. The National People's Congress passed an anti-secession law. And of course, it's not a law at all, properly speaking. It's better understood as a statement, a policy statement by the Chinese Communist Party that it wants to frame as representing the sentiment of the entire Chinese people. The anti-secession law makes it clear that the PRC is determined to exert control over Taiwan and is prepared to use military means to do so. So what about beyond Taiwan? What about beyond Taiwan? To a certain extent, China's focus on Taiwan has obscured its larger strategic goals. I believe, in 25 years of studying China, that Beijing does have a grand strategy, and that it is a strategy of intimidation, expansion, of assertiveness and domination on a global scale. It is a strategy of hegemony. Now, hegemon is a word, along with hegemony, that China itself introduced to us. In 1971, on Kissinger's secret trip to China, Zhou Enlai used a word that was not familiar to Kissinger. Kissinger had a fairly good vocabulary, but he didn't know what the word hegemony meant. And Zhou Enlai accused the Soviet Union of seeking hegemony. And so Kissinger had to look in his dictionary to find out that hegemony means a single pole or axis of power. Now it's important to realize that it doesn't just mean a superpower, because you can have more than one superpower. You can have 2 or 3 or 4. There is no theoretical limit to the number of states you can have that are able to exert military force anywhere in the globe they choose to, which is the definition of a superpower. It's even more than the French say a hyperpower. Hyperpower. It's a single dominant polar axis. It has no equal, because it has defeated, quashed, subsumed all potential equals. China has a strategy of hegemony. Now, why do I think that? Well, first of all, the founder of the People's Republic of China was a fellow named Mao Zedong, the greatest mass murderer in human history. Killed about 70 million of his fellow countrymen in various ways. Now, there's a lot here in the book, and there's a lot here that I'm not gonna go into great detail with. But let me just tell you one anecdote. A friend of mine, now deceased, Father Seamus O'Reilly, he was a Columban missionary. He was in China in the 20s, 30s, 40s, imprisoned in the early 50s, tortured, forced to write confessions, and finally expelled in 1953 along with the rest of the Catholic missionaries in China. Father Seamus recalled to me that when he was being interrogated in the office of local communist officials, he saw a map of the PRC that included all of Southeast Asia, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, Burma, Thailand, and Singapore within China's borders, and outer Mongolia and parts of north of the Yalu River in the Soviet Union and so forth. So these were the maps that were being printed in the early years of the PRC. Now Mao Zedong had grand ambitions. As soon as he was in power, we now know, in the early 50s, he launched a program to industrialize and militarize China. Spending on the military, on armaments, and on the arms industry took up about 60% of China's budget. Now, even Joseph Stalin, who was not one to stint on arms purchases, told him reportedly that this was excessive. Now, and Stalin was his chief arms supplier. Stalin said according to the archives that were examined in the former Soviet Union, Joseph Stalin criticized the budget as very unbalanced. Mao wanted a lot of things from Stalin. He not only wanted, China at the time could only make small arms. He wanted China to be able to make planes and tanks and ICBMs. Nuclear-tipped ICBMs were a particular priority. Why was Mao pursuing this military buildup? Well, the end game was Chinese hegemony. Mao bluntly told his inner circle in 1956, quote, "We must control the earth. We must control the earth." Now, the disastrous Great Leap Forward, which is widely understood as an effort to communize and collectivize the Chinese countryside and make all China's traditional and backward and feudal peasants into modern socialist men and women, was really not primarily intended to do that at all. It was primarily intended to bring all food production under the control of the Chinese Communist Party. Because the only thing that Chairman Mao had to sell in exchange for the planes and tanks and armaments factories he wanted from Stalin was food. And so he had to dragoon China's rural population into these huge communes so that he could put Communist Party officials in charge of the communes, so that he could keep track of exactly how much grain and pork and vegetable and peanut oil and everything else that was being produced, so he could then take half or more of what was being produced and give it to the Soviet Union in exchange for weapons. This is why 40 million Chinese peasants died in 1961 and 62. Not because of bad weather, not because the communes were mismanaged. It was because of Chairman Mao's deliberate program to militarize and industrialize China so that he could, quote, control the earth. Chairman Mao wanted steel not just to overtake Great Britain in steel production in 3 years, which is what you read in the standard histories, but he wanted to build a blue water navy for conquest. From a 1958 meeting, Mao told his leading generals and admirals on June 28th of that year, quote, "Now the Pacific Ocean is not peaceful." Well, the Pacific Ocean in Chinese is Taiping Yang, which means the ocean of peace. Taiping is peace, like the Taiping Rebellion, Taiping. And so he was making a play on words here. He was saying the ocean of peace is not peaceful. Quote, "It can only be peaceful when we take it over." Also present at this meeting was Lin Biao, Mao's closest ally in the military. And Lin Biao then interjected, quote, "We must build big ships and be prepared to land in Japan, the Philippines, and San Francisco." Mao then continued, quote, "How many years before we can build such ships? In 1962, when we have enough tons of steel." Later in 1958, and this was the year of the Great Leap Forward, when these peasants were dragooned into these communes and when all food production, all industrial production finally came under the control of the Communist Party, Mao called together the heads of all of his provinces, his governors as it were, and he said this, he said, quote, "In the future we will set up the Earth Control Committee and make a uniform plan for the earth.